In the vast expanse of the Atlantic Ocean, like an emerald, lies the island of Madeira, its history full of mysteries and unexpected turns. This picturesque corner of the earth, known for its lush gardens, tart wine, and dramatic landscapes, holds within its depths legends that sometimes go beyond the usual understanding of human relationships. One such intriguing aspect, shrouded in the veil of time and interpreted differently, is the narrative of how the island's men, during certain periods of its history, might have entered into peculiar contractual relationships with arriving sailors concerning women. This isn't a story of coercion or violence, but rather of complex social adaptations, driven by harsh living conditions and a unique economic system, where every family, every person, strive to survive and secure a future for their children.
Why did such narratives arise, and what place do they hold in the anthropological study of human communities? To answer this, we must delve into the depths of cultural evolution, exploring the influence of geographical location and economic challenges on the formation of social norms and traditions. We'll see how, in conditions of isolation and limited resources, communities found unconventional, sometimes shocking to modern people, but often the only possible ways to sustain their existence. And most importantly, we'll try to understand how these seemingly exotic practices actually reflect universal human aspirations for security, prosperity, and the continuation of the species.
The history of Madeira, like many other isolated islands, is marked by periods of economic instability and migration. Harsh climatic conditions, limited fertile land, and dependence on the outside world, especially in the age of sailing ships, presented the local population with complex challenges. The sea was always both a source of life and a source of danger. It brought food and goods, but it also took men on long voyages, leaving families without providers. In such conditions, every decision, every action had far-reaching consequences.
Imagine an island where a large portion of the male population was forced to spend months or even years away from home, engaged in fishing or trade. This created an imbalance in the social structure. Women were left alone, with children, with the household, with the necessity of supporting the family. The arrival of ships carrying sailors from distant lands could be seen not only as an opportunity to get news and goods, but also as a potential factor influencing the island's life. In the context of certain historical periods when the economic situation in Madeira was particularly difficult and opportunities for marriage or supporting a family were limited, situations could arise that a modern person would perceive as extraordinary. This might not have been about the trade of women in the usual sense of the word, but rather about unspoken agreements, a kind of social contract aimed at ensuring survival and well-being.
Let's try to break this down. Firstly, there's the factor of economic necessity. On an island where scarce resources and dependence on external markets could lead to hunger or poverty, any opportunity to earn a living was valuable. If arriving sailors who spent some time on the island were willing to offer their help, whether in the form of financial support, food, or other resources, in exchange for certain forms of intimacy or temporary partnership, this could be seen as a measure of last resort.
Secondly, there's the issue of social adaptation. Human societies have always strived to establish rules and norms to regulate behavior. In conditions where traditional family structures could be tested, communities might develop new, unique mechanisms to maintain order and stability. These mechanisms might have been unwritten, based on mutual understanding and unspoken agreements, but they still played a role in the island's life. It's worth noting that such a practice, if it did occur, was likely far from an idealized picture. It was probably a complex, multifaceted relationship where elements of mutually beneficial cooperation coexisted with potential risks. Women involved in such situations might have had different statuses and motivations. Some might have done it for the survival of their family, others for the opportunity of a better life or education for their children.
It's important to emphasize that these situations were not widespread and were likely not the primary form of relationships on the island. The history of Madeira, like any other human community, is a mosaic of many different practices, traditions, and individual stories. We're talking about those moments when society, faced with exceptional circumstances, developed exceptional solutions. Anthropological studies of this kind help us understand how diverse human relationships can be and how much they depend on the environment, economy, and social structure. Instead of judging by modern standards, we should try to understand the logic that drove people in those distant times.
Let's consider examples from other cultures that faced similar challenges. On many coastal islands where seafaring was the main occupation, women were often left alone for extended periods. In some cultures, to mitigate the consequences of this situation, systems of temporary partnerships existed, which could include both economic and social aspects. These could be alliances that helped women manage household affairs, provided protection, or even assistance in raising children. For instance, in some Polynesian societies where men frequently left on long expeditions at sea, there were what were called temporary marriages, or marriages of necessity. These allowed women to find support and help during their husbands' absences. These relationships, of course, had their own rules and limitations and were strictly governed by social norms.
Comparing this to Madeira shows that, despite geographical distance, human communities facing similar problems could develop comparable, though unique in detail, solutions. This points to an inherent human capacity for adaptation and finding ways to survive in a wide variety of conditions. So why might such a history, if it occurred, have been interpreted in this particular way? Perhaps it's because the arriving sailors, being outsiders, didn't always understand or accept local social norms. Their view of what was happening could have been distorted by their own cultural beliefs, leading to the spread of rumors and legends.
It's important to distinguish real, albeit unusual, social practices from myths and stereotypes. That's precisely why a scientific approach, based on verified data and in-depth analysis, is so crucial. Historians and anthropologists, by studying archival documents, folklore, and archaeological findings, try to reconstruct the past, separating fact from fiction. For example, if we found evidence that certain rituals or customs existed on Madeira related to the arrival and stay of sailors on the island, that could give us a key to understanding what was happening. These rituals might have been aimed at maintaining social order, regulating relationships between the local population and visitors, preventing conflicts, and preserving harmony.
Rites of passage, which accompany significant stages in a person's or community's life, play a huge role in maintaining cultural identity. On Madeira, such rituals might have also existed for temporary partnerships, helping to regulate them and reduce social tension. The social roles played by women and men in this context were also shaped by economic and social realities. Women, remaining in charge of the household and keepers of the hearth, were forced to take on additional responsibilities. Men, in turn, faced the necessity of providing for their families, even when far from home.
When we talk about the selling of women, it's most likely a simplified and possibly distorted interpretation of more complex social and economic mechanisms. It could have been related to community mutual aid, where a family facing difficulties received support from other community members or from visitors, and in return offered their own help or other forms of cooperation. Imagine a trading ship arriving at the island, with sailors on board who spend several weeks or months on Madeira. They have disposable income and are looking for a temporary companion. At the same time, there are families on the island where the men are absent and the women are forced to cope with difficulties alone. In such a context, arrangements might have arisen that allowed sailors to receive certain services or companionship, and women to receive financial assistance or support.
This wasn't trade as we understand it today, where one person is the property of another. Rather, these were contractual relationships based on mutual consent, albeit under significant social and economic pressure. It's important to remember that every culture has its unique paths of development, And what seems strange or unacceptable to us might have been perfectly natural and logical for people living in those times and conditions. That's why anthropology strives for understanding, not condemnation. If we talk about progress in the context of these events, it lies not in the practice itself, but in how human communities, facing challenges, found ways to survive and develop. This demonstrates the amazing flexibility and ingenuity of humans, their ability to adapt to the most diverse conditions. The history of Madeira, with its secrets and mysteries, serves as a valuable lesson. It reminds us that the world is far more complex and diverse than we can imagine, and that behind every, even the most unusual, cultural phenomenon, there are real people, their aspirations, their hopes, and their struggle for survival. In conclusion, we can say that stories about the selling of women on Madeira are most likely a reflection of complex social and economic adaptations driven by the unique living conditions on the island. This isn't a story about simple trade, but rather about necessary measures, about finding ways to survive with limited resources and isolation. By studying such phenomena, we not only learn more about the past, but also better understand ourselves, our own nature, and our capacity for adaptation. These stories, though they may seem shocking, are actually part of the great evolutionary journey of human communities, a journey that never ceases to amaze us.